By the early 90s, the Oklahoma City Police Department knew that they had a problem with her, that she had been committing such acts in many cases. It wasn't just me. That was the other thing that surprised me the most, that disheartened me the most, and just completely destroyed my faith in the system. When I first got there, I tried to make myself believe that maybe it was just an isolated incident, that they had made a terrible mistake. But I went to the law library as often as I could, and I studied, and I read, and I spoke to other inmates, and I read their transcripts. And I realized that it wasn't just me, it's just the way our system is run, that it's susceptible to deliberate abuse, outside just the simple human factor that all of the men and women in law enforcement are human beings and prone to making mistakes, just like we all are. By the early 90s, as I said, they realized that they had a problem, that she'd been doing this, and each subsequent case that she testified in became more and more about her credibility instead of the facts of the crime, the defendant, or the victim. The trials became about her. They knew that they would have to pull her from that duty, testimony duty. They did that, but right just prior to pulling her from any further duties in that capacity, the last thing that she did was she committed a crime against one of my neighbors on death row, a man named Alfred Mitchell. The Oklahoma City Police Department didn't have DNA testing facilities, and in that case, they took the semen that had been recovered from the victim and they sent it to the FBI for DNA testing, and the result was negative. He was not the person who, at the least, raped the victim. The semen didn't belong to him. In 1998, a federal court ruled that Joyce Gilchrist, with the knowledge and participation of the Oklahoma County District Attorney, changed the answer from negative to inconclusive, took the stand and told his jury that he matched the biological evidence collected at the crime scene, and therefore he had to be the perpetrator. And her testimony was perjury. It was false. All those years that she had been manipulating the system, committing crimes, committing perjury, we could never get anybody to investigate, to listen to our complaints. But this time she falsified a federal document and the FBI got involved. They were provided a list of 8 cases to review. They found wrongdoing in all of those cases, and I found out subsequently that I was one of the 8 cases that was reviewed, which set off the chain of events that resulted in my freedom.
For those of you just tuning in, this is Curtis McClarty, who spent 22 years on Oklahoma's death row for a murder that he did not commit and was then exonerated by DNA evidence, ultimately. And he has just shared a very short version of his story. Curtis, could you talk a little bit about where you're at today? You spent 22 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit. You had to come to terms at some points with the fact that you might be executed for a crime that you didn't commit. Now you're a free man, and you're here in Nebraska. So where are you at today?
Those weren't the only lessons that I learned when I was on death row, that, trying to come to grips with what had happened to me and the people that did it, trying to understand them and trying to recognize their humanity as well. I learned that was an important lesson that I learned, that I couldn't expect people to honor my rights and my own humanity if I didn't do the same for them. So I tried to come to some understanding about the people that did this to me. As part of that educational process, I thought about, for example, the claims that are made in support of capital punishment. And I believe that the arguments in favor of capital punishment are false. That they're not simply erroneous, they're false. I think the argument that most of us hear most often, because it seems to be self-evident, is that capital punishment deters crime. Anyone who is familiar with what is occurring in the state of Texas right now knows the argument to be false. Since the death penalty was reinstituted in 1973, they've executed more than 400 men and women. They still spend millions of dollars housing death row inmates who come through their doors on a regular basis because the death penalty does not deter crime. If the death penalty was a deterrent, there would be no one on death row in Texas, and that's not the case. I thought about those things over the years. I was angered by them that my family and my friends and even myself had been deceived over the years, that we were told that the government is basically infallible, that they're intelligent, educated people who know what they're doing, that they don't make mistakes, and that they're acting in the public's best interest. And I found out, at least for myself, that that wasn't true. I don't believe any of that to be true. When I was finally released, the truth is I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who to go to for help, to complain. I didn't know how to go before the public and tell them what had happened and why it had happened. To discuss with them the things that they hear about capital punishment, and I believe that those claims by the government are false. So I was left to my own devices, like most of the men who and women who are exonerated from prison, death row or otherwise, were simply shoved out the door. So you're free to go. If you were actually to commit a heinous crime like that and received a 40-year sentence and you served that sentence, you would be paroled, released back into the community where you would have any number of services that would be available to you, from housing assistance and counseling and drug counseling.